I, 45F, never thought I would be posting something like this here, but I really need to get this off my chest. I've been sitting here for hours trying to figure out how to even start writing this, but I guess I'll begin with some background. I got married to my first husband Tom when I was very young, just 19. We were college sweethearts, and everyone told us we were too young, but we didn't listen. I got pregnant with Juliet within the first year of our marriage. Being young parents was tough, but we managed somehow. Tom went into investment banking and started making good money, but he was never around. He'd leave before dawn and come back after midnight. Even on weekends, he was always networking or had important client meetings. I raised Juliet mostly by myself, and we became incredibly close. She was such a sweet child, always trying to make me happy, especially when I was sad about Tom's absence. As she grew older, she became my best friend. We would have movie nights when Tom was working late, which was pretty much every night. We went shopping together, had spa days, and told each other everything. At least, that's what I thought. Tom and I finally divorced 5 years ago. It wasn't dramatic, we had just grown so far apart that we were basically strangers living in the same house. The divorce was amicable, and we split everything fairly. Tom moved to a different city for work, and Juliet stayed with me while finishing college. After the divorce, I threw myself into my career. I had gotten my MBA while still married, but I had never really used it because Tom's income was enough for us. I started working at a corporate consulting firm and worked my way up pretty quickly. That's where I met Keith. Keith was different from Tom in every way. He was attentive, present, and actually wanted to spend time with me. He would bring me coffee in the morning just the way I liked it, leave little notes on my desk, and actually listened when I talked about my day. We started dating 3 years ago, and it felt like I was finally getting my second chance at happiness. The best part was how well Keith got along with Juliet. She was 22 when we started dating, and I was worried it might be awkward, but they hit it off immediately. They shared the same taste in music and books, and Keith would often help her with career advice since she was just starting out in marketing. I was so grateful that my daughter and the man I loved got along so well. Looking back now, I realize they got along a little too well. Keith proposed 6 months ago during a weekend trip to the beach. It was perfect, sunset, waves crashing, and a beautiful ring. When we told Juliet, she seemed thrilled. She immediately offered to help with the wedding planning, saying she wanted it to be perfect for me because I deserved it. She even insisted on being my maid of honor, saying she couldn't imagine anyone else standing beside me on my special day. Since I was busy with a big project at work, Juliet and Keith took charge of most of the wedding planning. They would spend hours together picking out flowers, meeting vendors, and arranging everything. I thought it was sweet how much effort they were putting in to make my day special. God, I was so blind. Yesterday, just one day before the wedding, everything fell apart. I was at home, going through my vows one last time when Juliet showed up. She looked terrible, her eyes were red and puffy, and her hands were shaking. At first, I thought she was having second thoughts about her speech or something wedding-related. I wish that had been the case. She sat down on the couch and started crying. I tried to comfort her, but she pulled away. Then she said the words that destroyed everything, "Mom, I'm pregnant. It's Keith's baby." I thought I had misheard her. I asked her to repeat what she'd said, hoping I was having some sort of stress-induced hallucination. But she said it again, and this time she added that she and Keith had been seeing each other for the past 4 months. She said it started innocently, just talking during wedding planning sessions, but then they started meeting for coffee to discuss wedding details, which turned into lunch dates, and then I felt like I couldn't breathe. I called Keith immediately and told him to come home. He must have heard something in my voice because he said he'd be there in 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes were the longest of my life. Juliet sat there crying while I stood by the window, feeling like my whole world was collapsing. When Keith arrived, I expected him to deny everything. Instead, he walked in, took one look at Juliet's tear-stained face, and said, "You told her." Just like that, as if we were discussing the weather. I lost it. I started screaming at him, asking him how he could do this to me, how long this had been going on, if he had ever really loved me or if I was just a way to get close to my daughter. He tried to explain, saying he hadn't planned for any of this to happen. He said he had genuinely loved me when he proposed, but spending time with Juliet during the wedding planning made him realize he had feelings for her too. He said they had tried to fight their feelings, but they couldn't help falling in love. I threw them both out of my house. I couldn't stand to look at either of them. I called my best friend Sarah, who came over immediately. She helped me send messages to all the wedding guests explaining that the wedding was cancelled. I couldn't bring myself to tell them why, I was too ashamed. Later that evening, Juliet came back. She tried to explain that she never meant to hurt me, that she and Keith had real feelings for each other, and that the pregnancy wasn't planned. She said they had used protection, but these things happen. She actually had the nerve to ask for my blessing, saying she didn't want to lose her mother over this. I told her she should have thought about that before sleeping with my fiancé. I reminded her of all the times she had sat with me, planning my wedding, knowing she was sleeping with the groom. I asked her how she could look me in the eye every day knowing what she was doing. She just cried and said she was sorry, but that she couldn't help who she fell in love with. Keith came by today while I was at work and moved all his things out. He left his key and a letter. I haven't read it, I just threw it in the fireplace along with all our photos. Sarah is staying with me, helping me deal with all the wedding cancellation arrangements. The venue wants their full payment since it's such short notice, and the caterers are only willing to refund half the amount. I've blocked both Keith and Juliet's numbers. I can't stand to look at my social media because there are still photos of us together, the three of us at Christmas, at Keith's birthday party, at our engagement celebration. Every memory is now tainted by their betrayal. The worst part is knowing that while I was planning my wedding, my daughter was sleeping with my fiancé. While I was writing my vows, they were planning their future together. While I was picking out my wedding dress, my daughter was carrying my fiancé's child. I don't know how to move forward from this. Everything in this house reminds me of them. I need advice on how to handle this situation because right now, I can't even imagine ever speaking to either of them again. Update 1, it's been 2 weeks since my last post, and I want to thank everyone who commented and offered support. These past weeks have been a complete nightmare, and every day brings some new painful revelation or situation I have to deal with. I finally went back to work last week. I couldn't take any more time off without having to explain the real reason to HR, and I needed something to distract me from constantly thinking about what happened. The first day back was horrible. Keith works on the same floor, and even though I requested a transfer to a different department, I still have to see him occasionally in the hallways or the cafeteria. Every time I do, I feel physically sick. My colleagues keep asking about the cancelled wedding. Some are genuinely concerned, while others are just fishing for gossip. I've been telling everyone that Keith and I realized we wanted different things in life, which is probably the understatement of the century. A few people who worked closely with Keith and me have noticed the tension, and there are whispers going around. I try to ignore them, but it's hard when people suddenly stop talking when I enter the break room. But the work situation isn't even the worst part. Last week, I received a pink envelope in my mail. Inside was an invitation to a baby shower. Not just any baby shower, my daughter's baby shower. The invitation was from Keith's sister Amanda, who used to be my friend and was supposed to be one of my bridesmaids. The shower is planned for next month at Amanda's house, and the invitation specifically mentioned that the grandmother-to-be's presence would make the day extra special. I was so angry I could barely see straight. The nerve of them, to think I would want to celebrate this pregnancy. I called Amanda immediately. She picked up with this fake cheerful voice, acting like nothing was wrong. When I confronted her about the inappropriateness of the invitation, she actually defended Keith and Juliet. She said they were young and in love, conveniently forgetting that Keith is 38, and that I should be happy because true love doesn't follow rules or conventions. Amanda went on to tell me that Keith and Juliet were planning to get married after the baby was born, and that I should accept their relationship for my grandchild's sake. She said that holding on to anger would only hurt me in the long run, and that family should stick together no matter what. I hung up on her mid-sentence. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my ex-husband Tom called. Apparently, Juliet had gone crying to him about how I was being unreasonable and cruel by refusing to speak to her. Tom, who was barely present during Juliet's childhood and missed most of her important milestones because of work, had the audacity to lecture me about parenting. He said if I had been a more present mother instead of focusing on my career after our divorce, Juliet wouldn't have developed daddy issues and fallen for an older man. I reminded him that he was the one who chose work over family for 20 years, and that he had no right to judge my parenting when he had barely been a parent himself. He tried to argue, but I shut that down quickly. The last thing I need right now is parenting advice from a man who couldn't tell you what our daughter's favorite color was when she was growing up. The most painful revelation came from Maria, a junior employee at my company. She came to my office yesterday and closed the door. She looked nervous but said she felt I deserved to know the truth. According to her, she had seen Keith and Juliet having lunch together at a cafe near our office multiple times, months before Keith proposed to me. She even remembered seeing them holding hands under the table once, but hadn't said anything because she wasn't sure about what she saw and didn't want to cause trouble. This means Keith was already involved with my daughter when he asked me to marry him. All those romantic dates, the beautiful proposal at the beach, the excitement of wedding planning, it was all a lie. He was sleeping with my daughter while planning a future with me. The thought makes me physically ill. Sarah suggested I talk to a lawyer about the wedding cancellation costs. The venue alone is refusing to refund a $15,000 deposit, and the caterers are only willing to return half of what I paid. Keith sent me a check for half the total cost last week, but I tore it up and mailed the pieces back to him. I don't want his money. I've been selling things to cover the costs, including the engagement ring he gave me. It feels fitting somehow, selling the symbol of his lies to pay for the wedding that never was. The hardest part is dealing with mutual friends who keep trying to mediate. They say I'm being too harsh, that I should try to understand Juliet's perspective because she's young and in love. But she's 25, not some teenager who doesn't understand right from wrong. She knew exactly what she was doing every time she met Keith behind my back, every time she sat with me planning my wedding while carrying on an affair with my fiancé. Some friends have suggested family counseling, saying we need to work through this for the sake of the baby. But I can't even think about the baby right now. The thought that my grandchild was conceived while my daughter was betraying me is too painful to process. I know eventually I'll have to deal with all of this, but right now, I just need space to grieve the loss of 2 relationships I thought would last forever. Update 2. 6 months have passed since my last update, and the situation has taken an unexpected turn. Yesterday, I received a message on Facebook from someone named Rachel. She introduced herself as Juliet's friend from college and said she had something important to tell me about my daughter and Keith. At first, I was hesitant to respond. I've been trying to move forward with my life and hadn't spoken to either Juliet or Keith in months. But something about Rachel's message seemed urgent, so I agreed to meet her for coffee. What she told me changed everything. According to Rachel, Juliet had been dating someone else when she started seeing Keith, a guy named Mike from her office. They had been together for about 6 months, and Juliet suspected she was pregnant with Mike's baby even before she started pursuing Keith. Rachel showed me screenshots of conversations where Juliet had confided in her about the pregnancy. The messages were from about 7 months ago, right around the time she and Keith started their affair. In them, Juliet admitted that she had calculated the dates and knew the baby couldn't be Keith's, but she saw an opportunity. She told Rachel that Mike was struggling in his career and still lived with roommates, while Keith was established and successful. She thought Keith would be a better provider for her and the baby. Rachel showed me more messages where Juliet detailed how she deliberately got closer to Keith during the wedding planning, knowing he was attracted to her. She had planned the whole thing, using the pregnancy as a way to trap Keith because she had developed feelings for him and thought he would be a better father figure than Mike. I felt sick reading these messages. Not just because of Juliet's manipulation, but because I remembered how Keith had lost his job 2 months ago due to company downsizing. He had been the primary earner in their relationship, and I heard through mutual friends that they were struggling financially. Before I could process all this information, I received a call from Amanda, Keith's sister. She wasn't her usual self-righteous self this time. Instead, she sounded worried. She told me Keith and Juliet had been fighting constantly since he lost his job. Keith had started drinking heavily and was becoming increasingly paranoid about the pregnancy, questioning the timing and demanding to know more about Juliet's past relationships. I debated for days about what to do with this information. Part of me wanted Keith to suffer the same betrayal I had experienced. After all, he had chosen to pursue a relationship with my daughter while engaged to me. But another part of me felt he deserved to know the truth about the baby. Finally, I created an anonymous email account and sent the screenshots to Keith without any additional message. I didn't want to get involved directly, but I couldn't keep this information to myself either. 2 days later, Juliet showed up at my door. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and she was shaking. She told me Keith had confronted her about the baby's paternity and then things had gotten ugly. He had demanded a paternity test and kicked her out when she refused to take one immediately. She tried to justify her actions, saying she really had fallen in love with Keith and that's why she lied about the baby. She claimed she was going to tell him eventually but was afraid he would leave her if he knew the truth. She begged me to help her, saying she had nowhere else to go. I listened to her sob story without saying a word. When she finished, I asked her if she remembered the day she told me about her affair with Keith. I reminded her how she had stood in this same spot, crying and begging for understanding, claiming that love doesn't follow rules. I asked her how it felt now that karma had caught up with her. She tried to defend herself, saying she knew what she did was wrong but she was scared and confused. She said she really did love Keith and thought they could be happy together. I told her that real love doesn't start with lies and betrayal. Before she left, she asked me if I had been the one to send the screenshots to Keith. I didn't answer, but I think she knew. She looked at me one last time and said she was sorry for everything, but I just closed the door. I had heard enough apologies to last a lifetime. The next day, I heard from Amanda that Keith had moved out of their apartment and was staying with a friend. He's insisting on a paternity test, and Juliet has finally agreed to take one. I don't know what will happen next, but I feel oddly at peace. Sometimes the truth has a way of coming out, no matter how hard people try to hide it. Update 3. It's been 2 years since this whole mess started, and I felt I should give one final update to close this chapter of my life. A lot has happened since my last post, and some of you have been messaging me asking for updates. The paternity test results came back exactly as Rachel's messages had suggested. Keith wasn't the father. I heard through mutual friends that he completely broke down after getting the results. He moved to Seattle for a fresh start, and from what I've seen on LinkedIn, he's now a senior manager at a tech company there. Amanda told me he's dating someone new, a divorced mother of 2, and seems to be doing well. I'm glad for him, despite everything that happened. As for Juliet, she had her baby, a boy she named James. Mike, the actual father, was contacted after the paternity test results came out. He demanded his own test, which confirmed he was the father, but he wants nothing to do with either Juliet or the baby. According to Rachel, he was furious about how Juliet had tried to pass the baby off as Keith's and told everyone in their office about what she had done. Juliet ended up having to quit her job because of the gossip and workplace tension. Last week, Juliet showed up at my door unannounced. She looked different, older somehow, more worn down. She's working 2 jobs now, as a waitress in the mornings and a retail clerk in the evenings. She's struggling to make ends meet and can barely afford daycare for James. Her apartment's lease is ending next month, and she can't afford the rent increase. She broke down crying in my living room, apologizing for everything she had done. She said she realizes now how selfish and immature she had been, how she had thrown away the most important relationship in her life, her relationship with me, for a fantasy that fell apart. She admitted that she had been so caught up in the excitement of the affair with Keith that she convinced herself it was true love, when really, she was just trying to escape her responsibilities and find an easy way out. She asked if she and James could move in with me temporarily until she gets back on her feet. She said she's changed, that being a single mother has made her grow up and understand the consequences of her actions. She even tried to use James as leverage, saying I was punishing my innocent grandson for her mistakes. I refused. I told her that while I'm sorry she's struggling, she made her choices 2 years ago when she decided to betray me in the worst possible way. Her actions weren't just a mistake, they were calculated decisions made over months. She had countless opportunities to come clean, but instead, she chose to lie and manipulate everyone around her. She left crying, saying I was being cruel and unforgiving. Maybe I am, but I've learned that sometimes maintaining firm boundaries is the kindest thing you can do for yourself, even if it hurts others. Some wounds run too deep to heal, and some betrayals can't be undone with apologies and tears. As for me, I've finally found peace. I got another promotion at work, bought a small vacation home by the lake, and have made new friends through a hiking group. I've even started dating again, nothing serious yet, but it's nice to know that my heart isn't completely closed off. Some people, including my ex-husband Tom, tell me I'm being too harsh, that I should forgive Juliet for James's sake. But I've learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean letting someone back into your life. Sometimes it just means letting go of the anger and moving forward without them. I still see James occasionally at family gatherings. It's impossible to avoid completely, but I keep my distance. It's not his fault how he came into this world, but every time I look at him, I'm reminded of the betrayal that created him. Maybe that will change with time, maybe it won't. For now, I'm focusing on my own happiness and healing, and that's enough.